Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to Seek Stand. I'm Owen, this is Dara. We are powerlifting coaches and we've helped powerlifters all the way from their first 100 kilo squat to their 300 kilo squat and everywhere in between. And we help a lot of variety of different powerlifters, male and female, across different levels, and we're trying to bring some of that knowledge to you so you can understand some of the things you might need to do or get some ideas for your own training. And one of the big decisions you need to make is that after you do your powerlifting competition, what do you do next?
So the first thing you should do is take some time off. As Owen said, we coach a lot of powerlifters. We've had a lot of powerlifters on the books over the years. And one of the major mistakes we see is that due to certain outcomes in powerlifting competition, they will go immediately to the gym the week afterwards and try and maybe make that bench that they missed, or try and peak their squat or hold on to that peak for a small bit longer. In almost every circumstance, this turns out to be the incorrect decision. Powerlifting competitions are somewhat unique in the sheer amount of central nervous system fatigue you get. So not only are you maxing your squat, but you're also maxing bench press and deadlift on the same day. Now, there's a lot of research out there on the amount of central nervous system fatigue and how quickly that fatigue dissipates, but it's fairly safe to say that for the week after a powerlifting competition, when you've maxed all three lifts 3 times, you are going to be very fatigued. So what does this mean in the real world? What this really means is that you're just not going to be as sharp. So mentally and physically, you're not going to be able to perform as well as you possibly can. And that generally leads to disappointing performances once again in the gym. So maybe the competition didn't go exactly as you planned. And now you go to the gym and the gym session doesn't go to the plan either. What it also leads to, though, and probably more seriously, is an increased risk of injury. So a lot of time we've trained for 16 weeks or 12 weeks leading into this competition. Maybe it's even longer than that. And you say, oh, I'm peaked. I'm at this condition. I know I can hit another single. This is the worst possible time for you to be hitting singles. Don't throw it all away. You have plenty more years of training under your belt. In the week after the competition, it's very important you just take the break. Take some time off. That doesn't mean doing nothing. That doesn't mean lying on the couch for the week. What it usually means is probably taking 2 or 3 days without lifting anything at all, getting plenty of physical activity in, so getting that blood pumping, moving around. Maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's playing some sports that you enjoy playing, some five-a-side football or something like that. And then maybe on the Wednesday, maybe on the Thursday, getting back to the gym, getting back to some light lifts, but not going for the heavy singles like you had the weekend previous.
Now, the next step is to decide what you're going to do with your programming following this time off. So you've taken that 1 to 2 weeks off, and you basically have 2 options available to you. It is back into a powerlifting prep or take your off-season prep. The rule of thumb we usually use for off-season prep for powerlifters is that it's essentially minimum once a year, but also about a maximum of once a year. You really don't need to do this too often, but it is very important to reset and touch base with that off-season prep every 12 months or so. So if it's been 12 months or more since you've done a proper off season, now is probably a good time. Too frequently, too many off seasons during the year, unless you need them from an injury rehab or something like that, don't actually become that productive for powerlifters. The nature of powerlifting is somewhat general. 10s are kind of an off season for powerlifters when it comes to heavy singles in the gym, but sometimes we need to take a further step back from that and get very unspecific with our work for about a period of 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes you can push that out to 8 weeks if you feel like you need it for you and if it's you have the time available to you. It pays a lot of dividends, general athletic ability, things like a little bit of conditioning or a little bit more conditioning, a little bit of sprinting, maybe some plyometrics, some general movement, proprioception. Treat yourself like an athlete in that off season for a couple of weeks can be hugely beneficial in terms of coordination, dissipating some of that specific fatigue, increasing your athletic ability, potentially for injury, changing that injury. A lot of powerlifting injuries or pains or repetitive strain injuries, and if we take the loading off those, we can get a lot of benefit from them. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits to powerlifters, is that we take that loading away from those elbows, those pecs and those shoulders, and we go do things that aren't generally loaded. And even though we mightn't be very good at those things, Like Dara said, we go play five-a-side football for 2 months during the summer with our friends, and we play some pick-up basketball, or we go practice a little bit of jiu-jitsu for a few weeks. It's not a major issue, and while those sports can incur their own injuries, this off-season is super beneficial for that general athletic ability. Back in the day, Westside and Elite FDS used to talk about GPP very frequently. This is something that came from the kind of Soviet sports side of things, or general physical preparedness, and it's something that's fallen by the wayside a little bit, which to an extent does make sense, because we don't need to get super unspecific very frequently for very long throughout the year, but there is certain periods where it does become very beneficial. And even if you feel like you don't need it right now, if it's been that 10, 11, 12 months since you've done one, it's prudent to take it now and head off those issues before it becomes an issue. However, if it's been 3-4 months, you've done your competition, it might be time just to get back into that prep and start that prep again, that 10s or 8s or 6s, or however you start your peaking phase. Maybe you run them at 12, 16, 20 week blocks, whatever it is. It might be just time to get going again. If you feel relatively fresh, you didn't pick up any injuries, and you're in this position now where it's time to just keep prepping again for the next peak or for the next competition, preferably, is what you need to do. So decide, have it been a long time since I had my off season, a proper off season, since I've been a little bit more athletic, since I've put my body through a bit more range of motion, a little bit more conditioning than usual? Hopefully you're doing some conditioning. Or is it time to just keep going with that bandwagon? Oftentimes we'll see those consecutive preps are very, very useful. You might have seen that powerlifting peak we did with John Hack's videos, where he talked about he often hit his biggest bench on the second peak about 8 to 12 weeks later after the first peak. So you might be that kind of lifter where you need those kind of consecutive peaks and then going again, and it might benefit you a lot. So you need to assess what's going on, look at yourself, see what your past values are, and decide, is it time for that off season, or is it time to get back on the horse and start training again?
Now, the next thing is very much along the lines of what Owen's talking about, and that is auditing what you did last time. So you might consider this to be a needs analysis type exercise. We generally refer to it as auditing, and this is the most valuable hour you will spend in your year of powerlifting training. What does it look like? Well, for most people, we recommend sitting down with their laptop or with their phone in front of them, ideally having both your program and the training lifts available to view, and you just block out an hour of your calendar. Now, what I personally ask athletes to do is have their defined periods of the training program. So have an understanding that this was a volume accumulation phase, this was a strength realization phase, this was your peaking phase. Just have those boxes drawn out on paper, have the rough sets and reps you did. Maybe there's 2 or 3 standout sessions from each of those blocks. Write out the sets, the reps, the load you did, have a look at the video, see how it is, and just write down a small few notes. Now, what this looks like a lot of the time is maybe in the volume phase, you started with some sets of 8 or some sets of 10. As you build through those for a number of weeks, maybe your notes there will state, my work capacity was very poor, I needed more work capacity here. Or once I hit 180 for 10, I felt confident. Any small notes like that, these are things that are slowly going to kind of bleed out of your consciousness as you move further away from the competition and as you slowly kind of forget what the last 16 weeks was like. Now, the other thing when it comes to auditing your training is having that objective view of what you did, why you did it, and whether you're going to do it again the next time. So it might be that you're using a normal squat program and that squat program ran very well. It may be that somewhere around week 5 or week 6 you see things start to get a bit difficult. Maybe you review the videos and you see a noted degradation in form over what the videos look like in week 2 or week 3 of the program. Now, in most cases, the number one thing to do there is not immediately alter the program. You don't immediately need to change things off the bat just from viewing that. What we generally recommend now is looking at all of the auxiliary things that came around that. Did you suddenly stop doing quite so much accessory work when you went into that strength realization phase? Did you stop working on your work capacity when you went into that phase? Did your lifestyle change? Maybe you had some changes in work or changes at home that led to a bit more stress. Maybe you were working slightly longer hours. And all of these things, as we start to kind of fill in that picture and color in what that strength cycle looked like, will really inform what happens next time. Now, a very common move here, once we start seeing these general patterns in volume, in intensity, and in loading, what we generally see is we see noted points throughout our training cycle where I'll need to emphasize my recovery a bit more. Maybe I know that I need to take on a bit more calories for these sessions. Maybe I know that once I start going into that peaking phase, I can actually really start to fuel myself around training sessions that I mightn't have had to do during the previous weeks in the training program. All of this leads to you being more effective next time around. Now, the bigger decisions we're going to make are the ones that, like in the John Hack video where we talked about his bench press was always better in the second competition, those kind of realizations take a bit of time to come to. They take a bit of experience and kind of blood on your sleeve before you can really say, okay, this time my peak is going to be far higher in intensity. This time the bench press is going to come in 4 weeks ahead of the squat and the deadlift, and I can really push those bench singles for a bit longer. But all of these things are so valuable to know. And whether you're writing it down on a tablet, whether you're using your phone or using just an honest to God training journal, I cannot recommend highly enough that accumulation of information and then sitting down for an hour and going through everything and then making your decisions objectively following on from that. The last thing I'm going to say on the subject of auditing and on the subject of being objective with yourself, the day after the competition is not the day for this. Probably even 2 days after the competition is not the day for this. Usually the Friday of the week after is nice. For most of my athletes, when I'm recommending them to do this, I recommend them just block out an hour on their calendar at work. If you do it at home, you tend to kind of cut into your own time a bit more. But if you're in work and you can take that hour at lunchtime, or maybe half an hour here and half an hour there, you tend to be a bit more focused. Just sitting down at your desk, only having those 2 or 3 things to do and one task to achieve is far better for getting the best results possible here.
So one of the most important things when we're doing this needs analysis, or a very common mistake, is changing things for the sake of changing. This is really common. Sometimes it's psychological fatigue where you're just kind of sick of doing the same stuff. But very often people make these changes on the assumption that they have to change. If you added 20 to 50 kilos on all your lifts on the last competition in the 16, 20 week block or whatever you did, there is no good reason, unless you have a very specific reason from your needs analysis where you need to change some of those things. There's no reason to change them into this next powerlifting competition or this next training block. I've had powerlifters run the same assistance exercises for nearly a year on end while we add kilos to their total. We end up doing things like 150 kilo split squats or, very heavy RDLs compared to their deadlift, and it all works because if we see those numbers going up in competition day and on our training maxes, if we see those singles and squat, bench and deadlift going up, then there's no good reason to change things unless something props up. So maybe that's the bench isn't going quite as well and we need a bit more volume and assistance work, but we've maxed out our frequency of benching. Maybe we need to work a little bit harder on our mid back because we can't keep that same level of extension or flexion as we're pulling, so we need to be a bit more specific. And did we make that specific and did it make the change? Well, then there's no reason to believe that you can get rid of that just yet. You might need to keep doing that mid-back work or those hamstring curls or those RDLs for another 6 months before we've really solidified those changes. Maybe that's a technique change or maybe it's a max change. Whatever it is, just make sure you've good reasons for changing things. Don't change things for no reason. You can rerun those same programs multiple times. If you take the squat program on our app, we have people run that 4 to 5 times in a row. I don't know if anyone's run it more than 5 times, but we've seen lots of people run it 5 times and hit PBs each time. And these aren't small numbers where it's like, 100 to 110, 120 to 150. This is people going from like 160 to 220 after several runs. So don't change things for no reason. Have a good reason. Now, in fairness, psychological fatigue of that same exercise is a valid reason, but it's not really a good enough reason if maximum performance is your goal.
The last thing I want to talk about then, and this is really important, is post-competition blues. So if you haven't heard of them before, post-competition blues are feelings of low mood or feelings of low vigor directly following a competition performance. This happens across all sports, across all levels, and it is perfectly normal. So it doesn't matter whether the competition goes phenomenally well or incredibly badly. The post-competition blues can come for all of us, and they can come for all of us at any time during our competition career. If you're finding that you competed on Saturday and on Monday evening you have just no motivation to do anything, no motivation to train, you might just feel sad, you might feel incredibly fatigued, but also this feeling of your mood being terrible, this is normal. It happens very, very commonly in sport. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking after it. That doesn't mean you should just kind of expect it to happen and neglect yourself completely for that week because you heard someone on the internet saying it's normal. My big go-to thing during that week is understand that it's there, understand it's going to happen for a lot of people throughout their competitive career, and then try and do things to help this. Now, what comes along with all of this, and almost always with post-competition blues, is that the things you usually find enjoyable aren't that enjoyable to do. So it might be you might love playing chess on your phone at home, you might love playing PlayStation, or you might really enjoy going to the beach with your dog. And all of that stuff suddenly just doesn't really mean anything to you.
It's because your dog hates you now.
They hate you because you did a bad competition in your for your powerlifting, but it really is to be expected. What we get here is we get a massive momentum before the competition. We get this large amount of emotional importance being set on that competition and your performance at it. And then suddenly we get this big dump of adrenaline, and it really doesn't mean anything afterwards. So when we're at the competition, you put absolutely everything into it. Powerlifting competitions are quite unique in the fact that they go on all day long. You have the most psychological stimulation you could possibly have for a day. So you're listening to heavy metal music, taking massive amounts of stimulants, and lifting as heavy as you possibly can all day long. You're seeing your friends going and you're seeing your friends competing. And then you suddenly have this big deflation. It is perfectly normal. Try and look after yourself in that week following the competition. As I said, those things you usually find enjoyable mightn't feel that good. But what I would say is try and go out there and do those things that you know are good for you and you know are enjoyable. This doesn't mean go out and drink a heap of pints for 2 or 3 days afterwards. What it means is go out, get into nature, walk around, be physically active, do things that you know, if it doesn't make you feel psychologically good, you know it'll make you feel physically good. And just have the understanding that this is not going to last. This will be here for a couple of days. The longest we tend to see is around a week. And after that, these feelings will dissipate. As your central nervous system recovers, as your neurological system recovers, those feelings will gradually peter off and you will be back to normal, back to your normal self.
The big thing about that as well is a lot of times those biggest blues happen after the best competitions. So very often you might think, oh, okay, so if a bad competition, we've bad blues. But sometimes the bad competitions are actually a little bit better for the post-comp period because you want to get back on that horse immediately. Maybe physically you're not ready, but psychologically you're back in the mode where I'm going to fix the mistakes I made, which is a decent mindset if done at the right time, if you give yourself enough for a break. But if we have a great competition, and whatever sport that is, very often you can be like, oh, was that it? What do I do now? I've been working for this, maybe it's a massive goal for ages. So don't expect just because you had a good competition that you're going to feel fine after. Sometimes they're the ones where you can be the most satirist. Now, if you want to improve your powerlifting training, Sika Strength app has a lot of different things that you need. The biggest thing to do is just going to save you time by improving you faster than you probably would if you did it by yourself. You can run the mainstream powerlifting program on the Sika Strength app. This is on iOS or Android, or maybe you can run some of the individual programs if you want to push a specific lift just a little bit harder. You want to run the squat program, the bench program, the deadlift program. These will push your individual lifts a little bit faster, but we do recommend that if you don't have a specific need to do one of those, go straight to that powerlifting program and it will cover your needs. Dynamic loading adjustment, coach bod, video library, program library, contact form, access to the Facebook group where we do weekly live streams on your questions and feedback. So check it out. And Sika Strength on iOS and Android. Everyone gets a 7-day free trial when they sign up at any point. So just cancel before the end of the 7 days and you won't be charged anything. And you can have a look around and see what's going on with that app.